Hello and welcome to Nigeria Beyond 2023. I'm your host, Yemisi Lanre Ido. This is an economic chopping board of the agenda of every presidential candidate vying for the highest office in the land. Are their plans good enough to get Nigeria rising again? Are they based on well thought through economics or just wishful thinking? We're about to find out. On the chopping board today, I'll be joined by Senior Economist, Impact Research, Proshare, Tosin Ige. Also joining me is the Chief Economist, CEO of Streetnomics Ltd, Gospel Obele, and the Secretary General of the African Action Congress, Ina Okopi Agu. And so today, we kick off with the presidential candidate of the African Action Congress, Omoyele Sowore, a human rights activist, media expert, pro-democracy campaigner, and founder of the AAC party. He has promised to get Nigeria back on the path of progress. As he says, we cannot continue like this. He has promised, amongst other things, to restructure the Small Medium Enterprises Development Agency of Nigeria, declare a state of emergency in education, as well as carry out a comprehensive review of tax incentives for domestic industrialists and multinational corporations. Let's get down to it. Let's get straight to business with the AAC manifesto. He talked about decentralizing power in Nigeria. We know that at this moment, power is erratic in Nigeria. And let me give you some facts here. Every 1% increase in power outage translates to about 2.8% decrease in GDP for sub-Saharan Africa. And that's a loss to GDP of about $25 billion. Now, the UK is also experiencing, energy issues at this moment, affecting so many things. What do you think they are differently to handle this situation? Just before I come to the others in the studio and virtually as well. Let me get your take on this.
First of all, is the construct about how power is generated and how it's also distributed to homes, as the case may be. The economics around that design and distribution is the first place that I think we need to get right in Nigeria. And that's very critical, going forward in terms of how we uptake for national productivity and even human capital as well. Yeah, so I think that's very important. And to a very large extent, it also has to do with revisiting the basic structural concerns around how, power is generated and distributed to start with. What are the constitutions say about that? What are the legal engagements around it? What inform the decisions around the national grid positioning and all that? So a lot of things have to be revisited from the scratch in order to redesign properly from the scratch. And until we begin to look at it from that context, we may not be able to serve accordingly. Within the context of the UK, a lot of all these basic elements have been handled right now. The energy crisis we find now, which is also very consistent with what we have in Nigeria, but at a different level of impact, is the fact that the Russian-Ukraine war has also impacted on the global supply and exchange of energy in the world right now. And that's impacting on the cost of living crisis and access to energy, and also uptaking energy at a reasonable level of consumption and for productivity, as the case may be. For Nigeria, it doubles up at different levels. Now we've also seen the fuel scarcity and all the different nuances of this challenge at play. So first off, we need to get back to the basics of, deconstructing, or will I use the word restructuring? Yeah, restructuring around all the enablers that inform how energy is being generated and how it's being distributed in the first place, and how it's being deployed correctly for human capital production, for human consumption, and then for productive engagement in the country right now.
All right, talking about the enablers, now let me come to you, Ina Okopi. Your candidate says he wants to decentralize power. The three networks that we have on ground, we have the GENCOs, who are the generators, we have the TCN, that's the Transmission Company of Nigeria, as well as the discos, the distributors. Now he wants to decentralize power. Privatization has been given to gencos as well as the distributors. How much more does he want to decentralize?
To begin with, you need some background to understand why we need to move away from the structure as it is today. Over the last 12 years, we've had 222 shutdown of the national grid. 5 of those, or 6, happened in 2022 alone. And it shows one thing. If we continue with the structure as constituted, it would not work because we have a national grid that is completely broken down. The transmission lines are too old to even stand. And then because of the structure of the power sector, it does not encourage for us to be able to expand this power generation. And for what you have seen so far, Nigeria as a country has been struggling with 7,500 megawatts. And so much money has been thrown into it, it's not working. There are communities in Nigeria that are unreachable because of their terrain or the distance from the cities. This is 60-something years on after independence. My village, where I'm from, to this day, we still do not have power. And it shows that that hasn't worked. And so what AAC proposes to do is to decentralize the power generation architecture. To do that, what we plan as a party in our manifesto would be to first look at the Constitution and try to see how we can take off power from the exclusive list. Once we have done that, it makes it now easy for you to encourage people to get into the mix and set up mini grids across the country. That is the simplest way you can get our power challenge corrected. We talk about the poverty situation in Nigeria. The reason that is because we're not producing. And how do you produce when you don't have power? And every country in the world that has grown to become a first world nation began from industrialization, like Britain from like 200-300 years ago. They had power, they began to use coal to generate power to do production. We do not have that. So the way our national grid is constituted now, we will never get out of this. We'll keep struggling with under 7,000, 10,000 megawatts until we allow mini grids to spring up around industrial hubs.
Yes, the national grid seems to be overwhelmed, but hypothetically, let's look at it. Diversification, I think, is what may really work here. So before I let you go, let me get your view about diversification. At the moment, the gencos are generating power through the gas. Through gas plants, if I may put it like that, and also a bit given to hydro power plants, and just a little to solar PV. Now, what do you think Nigeria should be looking at here? I think in my home I'm using solar. Should the government pump in money through solar, or what should we be doing?
Yes, so I think we need to do more around providing alternative energy sources, quite honestly. I mean, pending the time when we successfully privatize or build more microgrids and all that. Those are very intensive projects that are very possible, but would take pretty much some significant amount of time to fully execute on them and to properly pipe those things into homes. You need data, you need a lot of urban and regional planning around that, the economics, the politics, the legal conversations, the environmental considerations have to come into place to successfully pull that off. But pending that time, we could also embrace some form of alternative energy. But the challenge with alternative energy is that it could be a bit pricey and it could be a bit on the high end. So how can we scale alternative energy consumption how can we scale in large amounts such that it's readily available for consumption for Nigerians who need it the most? I mean, technically for all Nigerians to a large extent. One of the reasons why you have the first casting challenge in terms of long queues at the filling station and all that. It's because you have almost 60 to 70% of your population strongly dependent on PMS to run their households and their businesses. And that's why subsidy is also a narrative. Now, if you deal with the root causal issues, which are largely energy driven, by either providing alternative sources. I mean, we have almost 60% arable land in Nigeria. We have what it takes to build new solar farms. You know, we can democratize, you know, the access to alternative energy or sort of energy inclusion in context. Once we begin to do that and we begin to power homes more effectively, you realize that the queue at the filling stations will decrease, or the demand rather for PMS and in diesel as the case may be, would decrease almost by 50%. And once that decreases, the question of subsidy is no longer so relevant, because subsidy is important because your economy is driven heavily on PMS, not on you having been able to generate energy for productive use and all that. So I think that one of the major concentration right now, yes, there's an energy transition plan, but we need to break down the economics of that to ensure that the average Nigerian can access energy at a cheap amount and can scale the use of that energy in terms of doing more with it to be much more productive as an individual. So alternatives are the way, but the conversations around, like I mentioned, the economics of it, the legal bit of it, the political bit of it, the environmental side of it has to be fully brought into the core, you know, to effectively roll that out as a solution, as much as the mini grid conversation as well.
All right, thank you very much. We appreciate it.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Yeah, yes. All right, so let me bring in another economist here, Tosin. You listened to both of them.
Yeah.
Ina talked about mini grids. Let's go away from that. A lot of attention has been paid to oil and gas, and it's like it's the bane of these troubles. He was talking about how much generators consume. I got that fact that about $200 million is spent on fuel for generators in Nigeria. Now, moving away from that, the AAC plans to liberalize NNPC. We saw what they did with the PIA Act, but it looks like our problems continues to, you know, increase on a daily basis in Nigeria. Now, looking at the fiscal policy, really, and the plan and what was allocated to capital expenditure, we have just about 6.446 trillion. And the NSIA, that's the Nigeria Sovereign Investment Authority, plans to also create a solar tank farm. All of that just for us to get power sorted. Is this enough? As an economist, what should we be looking at? Those are lagging indicators, and we're not going anywhere with them.
Yeah. Thank you for that question. I think the issue of the power and the oil and gas, they are intertwined, so they fix in together. And truly, a number of things, what they raised concerning the power sector, if I must say, the AAC plan to actually decentralize the power sector is the way to go. Given that what we have seen in the time past, the GENCO, the transmission, and the DISCOs, there are problems across this chain. We'll talk about the DISCO now, the way the DISCOs were privatized. Now, almost all those who bought into this are having problem. Could say that I think it's only one of them that is not having debt. There are considerations to even take over some of them because they are having issues. And what's their excuse? That they are not able to recover their costs. Now, again, it brings the problem. What was initially set was for it to be the model of the telecom. You know how telecom is working now, but yet we've also identified that even in the privatization process, there are faults there. And you could see now, even from the GENCO to the Transco, all of them, there are disconnects, because there are times the GENCOs will say they generate this so power and they are not able to transmit, and the DISCOs do not have the capacity to take it.
It seems there's a sort of mismatch.
There is.
The TCN, there's a level to which the TCN could take from the GENCOs.
Yeah. So that's the problem. And you know, power. Now, for an average Nigerian, you either power your house with the electricity provided by this sector, or you power it with the petrol. And you know what petrol is saying now. So again, it leaves, that's why, you know, when one of them was talking, he said, let's look at alternative, the renewable. And what I was thinking is that I think over the weekend I was checking some solar out because you know the price of diesel. So I was checking some solar, and I found out that if I may be able to afford it, some Nigerians will not be able to afford this thing, because some of them runs into 200,000, 250.
It's actually expensive.
Very expensive. So again, it's a problem along that side. But then coming back to the oil and gas, yes, we've passed the PIA, is good, and the NNPC said they've been commercialized now. But again, what are we seeing from the NNPC now? We're not really seeing what we're supposed to be seeing, because yes, as a private sector driven, you're supposed to be efficient, much more efficient in terms of what you are delivering, what people need. Because now the IPMAN, Independent Petrol Marketers Association of Nigeria, they had this arrangement with the NNPC for them to be supplied, because NNPC has actually claimed that they have sufficient. So the IPMAN said, okay, supply us. And by the way, Hitman makes up like 80% of all the filling stations. So, but yet, Hitman is saying that NNPC do not supply them. So they had to go to the third party. And again, those third party are selling it for them at a high price.
Who are the major marketers?
Who are the major marketers? The like of, others, NNPCs inclusive. That I think
partners with NNPC, actually.
Yeah, so they are not getting the fuel from the NNPC, which of course, NNPC is the only importer. So again, we had to, you see, if you begin to mention along the value chain of oil and gas, you will see problem where someone dropped the ball. And of course, so that feed into the energy cost we're seeing now. And of course, businesses are high. So yes, the AAC saying that, what did they mention?
That they want to liberalize NNPC.
Yeah, they want to liberalize NNPC. Yeah, it's a good one where NNPC actually promised that by this year, they are going to list on the exchange. But I'm not seeing that materialize, because that's the only way, that's the way to go anyway. But I'm not seeing that materialize, because let's look at it. NNPC must actually report 3 years of their financials before they can list. And yes, I think they said they have, but that of the 2021, we've not even seen the book being public. So again, and they had to also bring out that of 2020, which of course, the subsidy component of it, or even the assets that belong to NNPC, what are the assets? We don't know the asset now, and yet it say you want to list.
We need an open book.
So we need an open book
for this thing to actually materialize. Thank you. Now let me get back to Okopi. Let's move on to industrialization and manufacturing. And I so much love the way we place this. Power, oil and gas. If power works, oil and gas would also incorporate, and industrialization will have a smooth take. Now, your candidate says he wants to spur the eco-developmental industrial revolution. That's the way he put it. Prioritizing industry and manufacturing, technology, and the likes, MSMEs in Nigeria. Now, how do you plan to do this? Looking at the state of power in Nigeria, as well as oil and gas.
Now, what we also plan to do as a party when we come to power is to enact a policy to encourage industrial hub generation of independent power projects. And so that would require some policy work around that, where you have these solar farms like the speaker who spoke before leaving, Obele. When you have that in place, the reason we're not able to produce largely is due to the fact that you don't have power to generate. And so you see countries, companies running away from Nigeria and going towards places like Ghana and Benin Republic, where we also sell power to. And if we encourage the establishment of all these solar parks and then independent power projects around this industrial hub, they are able to produce. And we have largely industrial hub, especially in a place like Abuja. You have one industrial hub around where the train station is. But how many factories do you have there? Even if you have factories there, there's no power to be able to generate. They all have to use diesel that is very expensive to get. And so what the party plans to do is to enact this policy to encourage the establishment of these IPPs around this industrial hub to create power, and then make incentives available to people, especially people who produce tax breaks, to encourage people to move into these areas. And then basically, we need to do a lot of work, which is not happening right now. A lot of what they say they will do is just lip service. And when we've not seen that translate into actual gains on the ground. And so as a party, we understand that the natural gas that we have is able to also support this industrial revolution that we're looking up to, and then also looking at other energy mix. I didn't have the opportunity to talk about it when we were talking about power the other time. There are energy mix that we're looking at.
All right, now let's look at MSMEs and employment. MSMEs at the moment contribute about 98%, if I'm right, I stand to be corrected, to businesses in Nigeria. But they have their attendant issues, right? We have the structured as well as the unstructured MSMEs in Nigeria. We'll talk about micro issues, which some of them have brought upon themselves, as well as macro issues. Now, let's look at this. What's your plan? How do you intend to integrate MSMEs when your candidate gets on board? Ina?
Awesome. This is how we plan to do it. And even though most government, usually when they come with all this government we've had, they usually would prefer to look at these big companies in the industrial parks and all that. If we get power correctly situated and we solve our power challenge. And when I say power, I'm not talking about this power when you hear all these politicians giving people this lantern in the village with solar panels on top to be able to light up their environment at night. Any power that is not able to support the setting up of cottage industries at our rural areas is not what we need. What we need is power that is able to generate enough, able to help us set up cottage industries. And this is where these MSMEs and SMEs fall into. We need to encourage that, especially at the rural areas. Now, how do you do that? Like I said earlier, it all about the power, setting up all these independent power project, mini grids across our rural areas to provide this power. And that we will do looking at energy mix. And also make credit available to them. Largely, these credits are usually, if you see where they come from, they either come from microfinance bank. The lending they can do is limited. We need to get to a point around the policy that would encourage even commercial banks to lend to SMEs and MSMEs. And one thing we plan to do as a party is to decentralize the registration of all these companies, especially SMEs and MSMEs, to local government areas. Some of these companies are not big enough to be able to own offices or rent offices. When you decentralize and make it easy for them to do their registration around local government areas, they can now use that local government area office as their office of contact. And then, of course, you consider all the bottlenecks around collateral and all that to make it easy for even commercial bank to get it into the lending pool and to make funds available for that. That is the simplest way you can get them involved in this revolution that we're looking at. Or if you leave it to the big companies that we know around town, it won't solve our job challenge, but we need to get them involved, and that is the simplest way to do it. Make power available, make credit available, walk around the policies, around the government regulations, and decentralize the registration of these small companies to local government, and so that it is close to the people in the rural areas, and that will be on our way.
All right, now I would love you to hold your thoughts while we'll take a break. When we come back from the break, we'll continue the conversation around MSMEs, integrating MSMEs to the industrialization sector of Nigeria. We'll take a break on Chopping Block, and when we come back, we'll continue the conversation. have you back on Nigeria Beyond 2023. I've been speaking with the Secretary General of the African Action Congress Party, Okopi Agu. Also with me in the studio is Senior Economist, Impact Research, Proshare, Tosin Ige. Yes, we're talking about integrating MSMEs into industrialization and manufacturing in Nigeria when your candidate gets on board. All right, Ina, you made salient points. You made salient points there, talking about credit to MSMEs, registration of MSMEs, and all of that. But we've seen what past governments have done. They've thrown around funds to MSMEs. Banks have been able to give credits, and we see that some banks have been burnt, right? Now, mixing this with unemployment rate in Nigeria, I said earlier that MSMEs contribute about 98% to businesses in Nigeria. I mean, employment as well. Yeah. But the unemployment rate keeps increasing. Does this tally?
Okay, thank you once again. I think the problem is that, yes, SME employ so much in the system, but when you consider business sustainability in Nigeria, you know that it's very weak. Businesses, the likelihood of a business failing within the first 5 years of existence is very high. Now, one of those things he talked about is is one of it, like the credit and of course the power. Yes, we understand the power definitely. Your business cannot run without power. We've talked about even as the micro, when you look at the micro businesses that even employ, that people could even easily set up in their houses. If you don't have power, it's likely going to fail. Now, but when we talk about the credit, yes, he was talking about setting up for commercial banks, setting up all of those things. I think the structure of commercial bank is what we see them doing. Don't forget, it's a private business. What they are doing is what they will continue to do, lending to this big wing, because those are the ones that can finance them. Of course, give them the interest they are charging. With MPR at around 17.5 now, definitely those commercial banks will be charging more on loan. But the microfinance bank that I actually talked about, they are actually set up for this purpose. Those micro, you see from the word micro, to target these people. But what we have seen is that many of this micro finance bank themselves, they are also dropping the ball, wanting to compete with the likes of all of these the commercial banks, and as such they are not lending to these people. And of course, the existing government, when they set up their own credit intervention, the channel with which they also channel these things are also faulty. You just see that now we can be seeing CBN having non-performing loan in its book. CBN, you're not supposed to be interfacing with people, but that's what our system has become now. So it's just, as I said, it's just all of these people dropping the ball when they are not supposed to, or failing in their primary purpose. And that's what brought us here. And that's why businesses are failing. That's why MSMEs are supposed to employ almost everybody, because of course in businesses abroad, these people employ and they grow. But multiple taxes is also another one that these businesses are facing. The current administration could say, okay, don't pay this tax, you have tax waiver, you have this tax holiday. The next government comes and say, no, we are having fiscal challenge, you need to be doing it. It has happened for gas, those in the gas value chain before, where one government said this and another one come and say this. So there is a whole lot of problem across the chain. So that's why for us now as analysts, what we're hoping is that somebody that will change the entire narrative is a completely whole reform. If you look at one side and do not consider the other side, everything may still come down.
Everything may come down. And I think that talks about education, really. Education is very critical. The statistics we have is that over 13 million out-of-school children in Nigeria at the moment. And SMEs or MSMEs, no, SMEs, let me come to that. Most of them do not even have the technical skills to set up. Some of them just want to jump into business because, oh, my friend is doing that business. Many of them do not have the technological know-how to set up. And that's why when many of them even go to the banks to lend money, they do not know how to make good use of that money. So education is very critical. So Ina, your party, if elected into office, says it would declare a state of emergency in the education sector. How would this position your party significantly when it comes to this? And we've seen history of how the governments of the day, what is budgeted for education all the time. So how would your party position education to impact these sectors that we're talking about?
I'll answer that question very simply. 3 things would need to be done. 1, funding. 2, remove corruption. 3, cure the incompetence in that sector. Now, let me go to the funding issue. What you have right now, they keep lying to us. So much money is spent and pumped into education, but we do not see that translate into actual gains on the ground. And you know why that is? What these people are focused in is just issuing contracts, purchasing things, supplying things, and making huge cuts on that. What we need at this point, and we said we're going to declare a state of emergency and focus squarely on education, because if you have an uneducated population, you are playing with fire in the future. Some of the challenges we have today, especially with regards to security, is because we neglected the population we were supposed to have educated years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago. You have 13 million, like you said while you were speaking. I think the figure is much higher than that. We need to encourage, as a party, when we come to power, we would ensure that we do not go below the international standard for funding for education. And then ensure that it does not just go into, you don't just spend into people supplying things and making money. We need to improve on the quality of our teachers. And basically what we'll do around education is to ensure that we take care of the challenge of quality, access, and relevance. And by quality, I mean improve on the quality of instructions and the curriculum. We need to revamp the curriculum as it is, because we have programs within the educational sectors that are outdated. For example, we're in Nigeria here, there are still schools in this country where they're teaching people how to write with slate. You know, slate that was used in the 70s and chalk. That is in another generation. We need to go into improving our educational sector. That is what quality would do for us. Improve on the quality of our teachers, spend more money training our teachers, build up our schools. There are schools in this country, especially primary schools, where you still go to, even in this FCT, where children sit on the ground to learn. That is unacceptable. We need to get technology into our schools, improve on the quality of teachers we put out there. Otherwise, if we don't do that, we cannot compete anywhere. The next thing we need to do is take care of, when we declare a state of emergency in the educational sector, is also look at access to education. No child, an AAC government will ensure that no child is left behind. A child should not be thrown out of school because the parents are unable to afford school fee, which is why we have said that as per education, we're going to ensure that it is free of charge from secondary to primary to secondary school. And at the university level, as a government, we have promised to give 100,000 naira to every university student. Now, the next question they will say that it will cause inflation. People, as one single man in this Abuja stole 150 billion or so, and it has not caused inflation. The National Assembly are paying themselves what they are paying themselves. It is not causing inflation. So we think that if you declare a state of emergency in the educational sector, the question of access, quality, and relevance. Relevance would speak to the curriculum. We'll look at it again and rejig it. You know.
All right, Ina, let's anchor on that your thought. It said 100 what did you talk about?
100,000.
100,000 to every university student. Is that viable?
Yes.
All right. For me, really, whether it's viable or not, I want to start by saying education now, especially the higher, the tertiary education, is expensive all over the world. See, if we begin to anchor it on, let's keep these people, we'll keep funding it, the model may not work, really. What is ideal
Exactly my
is
point.
that let us give this institution should run on their own. Tertiary institutions should be self-funding. They should be self-funding. If they are not self-funding, they won't run efficiently. People will definitely somewhere, they will drop the ball, knowing that, this adage that whether the boss sells or not, I'm going to collect my money. So this I don't care attitude will be there. But if you run efficiently yourself, make the money. In that instance, everybody, including the lecturers, they'll be quite innovative. Yes, for the lower level of education, we can still put some kind of interventions, although for us as analysts, we definitely always favor the market. Let the market always run its course because it's much more efficient, especially when you consider the public sector in Nigeria, the history of public sector in Nigeria, point to something that they've done efficiently. It will be difficult to really point to it. So government, yes, the government can't sit in the State House and make those institutions, but you need people to run it. So are you going to be monitoring those people every now and then? So that's why we always favor that, okay, let the market run its course.
So
It's always much more efficient.
let the market run itself. And I would have to round up on this, but let me get your last word on this conversation. Throwing money around, we've seen over time that in Nigeria, it doesn't work. Really, it does not work. So we might have to chop that off on your manifesto. 100,000 naira to every university student will not work. We'll listen to our economist here. It would work. Okay, so let's get your last word on that. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, I agree that especially for university education, the reason we have even the challenge that we have is because everybody is going to the university. We have not developed alternatives to people who leave secondary school to be able to go to technical schools and learn other things beyond going to university, because we have totally decimated that sector by not funding those angles that are supposed to be alternative to university. Everybody goes to the university, even though it is not adequate. Now, to the point where the analysts made, we're not saying throw money into education. The educational system should be able to fund itself. But you cannot just pull off the plug and say fund yourself. You have to, because the moment you do that, say fund yourself, the people who will be at the receiving end are the students and the parents. They won't be able to pay. And so you need to make available things like student loans and grants, so that students can go to school, their parents are able to pay for it. You obtain a loan to go to a university, when it becomes autonomous, they're able to pay their way through and then pay later. So the government needs to do this. That is one way you can also throw money at it without really throwing money at the system, to also encourage the inefficiency that is ongoing at the moment.
Right.
Yes.
I think you just cleared the air now. Yes, you just cleared the air through loans, through grants, scholarships.
Yes.
All right, so I think we'll just round up on that note. Many thanks for your time on Nigeria Beyond 2023. Okopi Agu, who is the Secretary General of the African Action Congress. Thank you so much for coming on the program. Well, thank you for your time, Tosin. Let's look at the fiscal manifesto of the AAC. It has pledged to carry out a comprehensive and systemic review of tax incentives. That's the way it puts it, for domestic industrialists as well as multinational corporations. I recall that Oxfam, in its recent report, said the gap between the rich and the poor keeps widening.
Yeah.
Now, will this work with this comprehensive and systemic review of tax incentives?
Okay.
Looking at the fiscal policy of the Nigerian government as it is.
Yeah, if they mean that they are going to review the existing tax incentive to remove some of them or to end some of them, then it will work, because truly we've found out that a number of our revenue actually leaked through this tax incentives. So of course, if they plan to do that, to wind down some of those things, yes, it will work. But to say they were going to give more tax incentive, then they'll be shooting themselves in the leg. So it won't work.
It won't work. But let's look at it. Do you think the rich should be taxed and we leave the poor out? Because that's what it recommended in that of Oxfam report.
No, I'm not. I do not favor that.
Do we continue with the tax holidays?
Yeah, there are different types of tax. You can do the progressive tax. The more you earn, the more you are taxed. So in that model, everyone is paying. Because if you say we should leave the poor, everyone will claim to be poor. You know, there has been this scenario of one, I don't want to, it's quite a long story, a bridge where they say, okay, if you wear shoe and you cross this bridge, you'll pay. But if you don't wear shoe, then you are taken as poor, you will not pay. But eventually, what they find out is that it's even the poor that are putting on shoe and they are paying because they want to claim that they are rich. So that model to say, let's tax some and not tax some, everyone, the rich will always find a way to evade tax, so they won't pay.
But at the moment, what's working?
Yeah, the system.
And do you think we should continue with that?
Yeah, I think this system we have currently, we should just continue it, but blocks the leakages, the loophole that we have in our tax system, and of course, strengthen the tax base, because we have some taxes that are not going to the government. So let's strengthen all those ones, block all those loopholes. Nigerians are paying tax, whether poor or rich.
Are you
now,
sure?
We're paying so much tax.
What's the figure of what Nigerians are paying?
It's not so much about the rate, but some tax that are not going to the government purse, people are paying. Now, if you take a bike or a bus, let me say a bus now, from one location to the other, now the park managers and of course the area boys, they are collecting from the bus driver. And the bus driver has internalized that cost into what you are paying for your fare. And so you're paying tax there indirectly, but you don't know. If you are hawking and you are passing through some places, you are paying. But those taxes are not going to the government, so it will seem like, oh, Nigerians are not paying tax. We are one of the highest in the world paying tax. So much tax.
Okay, let's look at agriculture. Agriculture, we used to say, is the mainstay. We used to. I doubt if it is that anymore. Now, the AAC says it wants to overhaul the agri sector. Is it about overhauling? And it says it plans to increase agri research. I think that's very important.
Yeah.
But what's your take as an economist?
Yes, to do the research is quite valid. But then the problem is, are we connecting the research institution to the players? Because yes, we have so much institution now. We have, in fact, in Ibadan, there are a number of research institutions. There are cocoa, there are all of this horticulture in Ibadan. But what's the connection between the institutions and the farmers? So we need to integrate them. If we integrate them, develop this genetically modified seed and the rest of them, it will work. Maybe that's what they are calling overhaul. If that's what they are calling overhaul, it's work. It's just we need to just connect the two.
I wish Ina was still here, because we would have loved to ask how they plan to do this. All over the world now, or mainly in the West, really, agri-tech is what is working.
Yes.
And I doubt if Nigeria is involved in that.
Some of our players are actually doing some things in that instance. We've heard of agri-tech coming up with all of this initiative, but it's just a private individual thing. So that's why, and of course, before they can scale, there are some hurdles they have to cross. So that's why it's not being mainstream as it is now, but some individuals are doing it, but not on the large scale that will give us the needed results.
Okay, so let's anchor on that now. Talking about research, agri-research and technology, it looks like, yes, small businesses, what do we call them now? The likes of, I wouldn't want to mention in the technology, I wouldn't want to mention their name now for this purpose, but it looks like Nigeria is still lacking a lot of research. Having incubators or accelerators that would encourage these ideas from these businesses. As an economist, why is Nigeria lagging in all of this? Or what would you suggest? Because yes, it says here that they are committed to creating an enabling environment to attract investment in the manufacturing of tablets, phones, and all of that. It looks like it's still the buzzword that they use.
I think we're doing it. If I can remember vividly, there is an IT headphone that was commissioned sometimes back that the president is saying this is a Nigerian manufactured phone. So some of those things are happening. But the problem I also think we have as a country is the fact that Nigerians have this preference for foreign things. So if I know this cup and the other one there, if I know this one is made in Nigeria, the other one is made in somewhere abroad, I'll prefer that one. Because the history has been that Nigerian-made goods are not so good. So that's why, and you know, that was the model before of what we call Chinko China thing there. But now, you will prefer to buy China thing because they've improved on it. So if we also improve on some of those things, yes, people will begin to go for it. And I think we're doing more, but there's still some things that we have not gotten right on the demand side in terms of Nigerians wanting to consume foreign things, and also in terms of our own scaling some of these things. We've had Nigerians develop a bus that uses solar. But where is it now? Government need to support those kind of things. So that's why government, in terms of the productions, are not doing as much as they are doing, but not as much as we want them to do. And of course, on the demand side, we have our own problem as Nigeria.
The guy you talked about, I think, is still in Kano.
Yeah.
The guy, so I don't think he has gone far beyond Kano.
And of course, you know, it's easy now. When the foreign country, whenever they see some of these folks, they are quick to attract them.
Yes.
And so those ones find it easy to, you know, go and develop those other country, not at home, because we're not attracting them with the right incentives.
All right, AAC didn't state explicitly what they would be doing to improve technology in Nigeria, but we appreciate your take so far on this. Tosin Ige, many thanks for your time on WebTV, Nigeria Beyond 2023. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
And that's a wrap on this edition of Nigeria Beyond 2023. But just before we go, a quick recap of the conversation. Well, it was agreed that there is a need for mini-grids to strengthen the power sector, allow for further independent power plants collaboration, state of emergency in the education sector, which economists agree will work. But a grant of 100,000 naira to university students is a no-no. Join us for another interesting conversation on this program as we continue to engage on socio-economic issues around the manifestos of political parties. I'll see you again. I am Yemisi Lanredo.